Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very, very special Vendors Hall panel. I'm thrilled to be here. Jay's thrilled to be here. This is just such an amazing experience for us. And I'm Kayleigha from Science Division.
I'm Jay from Science Division. We make the only app-enabled pet tribble you can find.
And our guests really don't need an introduction, but I will do one anyway. We are chatting today with Armin Shimerman and Kitty Swink. Both of them you may know from Star Trek. Armin, of course, was Quark on Deep Space Nine. And Kitty, you also were on 2 different episodes of Deep Space Nine. You were Avorta and Bajoran, I believe. And both of you voiced one of the Star Trek video games. You were both voices on Deep Space Nine, The Fallen, I believe.
That's correct. Absolutely. You've done your homework.
We knew we were going to be talking to 2 brilliant artists, so we figured we'd better, know a few things. But go ahead.
No, I was going to say I was talking to the woman who's doing the social media campaign for the theater on the new Zip Cut plays, and she looked you guys up and went, they make the, she was so excited about the tribbles. She was like crazy excited about the tribbles.
Well, that has just been a passion project for me. My dad raised us on TOS, and I, as a little girl, always wanted a tribble. And that actually takes me into my first question, which is that, Armin, I've heard you talk about that you were a Star Trek fan before being on Deep Space Nine, and I have always wanted to know a little bit about that.
Sure. Because I wouldn't be sitting here in front of you if I hadn't been a fan for lots of reasons. But I, as a young man, if that's hard to believe, I used to watch the show religiously, make sure I saw every episode. Of course, who knew that it was going to go in syndication and play forever, over and over and over and over again. But I was a big fan of the shows, and there are lots of stories connected to that. But perhaps the one that might be most interesting at this moment is when Next Generation was just started. It hadn't started airing yet. It started filming. And I auditioned for a non-Ferengi role. I auditioned for a prop, basically a talking prop, a wedding box, and was very fortunate that they cast me in that. And then I was waiting to get information about what day they were going to shoot when I got a phone call from my agent saying, Armin, you have to give up the Star Trek role, because at that time I was recurring on another TV program called Beauty and the Beast with Ron Perlman. And they were both needed me the same day. Star Trek needed me the same day as Beauty and the Beast. And because I'd done a number of episodes for Beauty and the Beast, my agents absolutely said, you have to give up the Star Trek role and you have to take on the Beauty and the Beast assignment. However, I was such a huge Star Trek fan that I had a huge argument with my agent saying, no, I want to do the Star Trek role. And they told me I was crazy. And in hindsight, they were right. But I argued pretty vociferously and won the argument and did the talking box. And then 2 weeks later, because I had done the talking box, they called me in for the Ferengi role on Last Outpost in Next Generation. And the rest is history. So if I hadn't been a fan, I wouldn't have done the first role or the second role. And certainly Berman told me many years ago that my appearance on Next Generation is secured my position as Quark on Deep Space Nine. Also, I should tell you one last quick story. I know you've got limited amount of time. I'm just going on here, and I have to let my wife speak, or else I'm going to be in deep trouble. Which is that for the first year, most of the other actors, the lead actors on Deep Space Nine, were not as familiar with Star Trek as I was, and I was the go-to person on the set for the other actors to ask questions. I don't remember who it was, but I distinctly remember someone coming up to me and saying, "Armin, you're a fan of the show. What's a Klingon?"
Before Dorney was on the show.
Oh, long before Dorney was on. And yes, I was, am, and will continue to be a big fan of Star Trek.
As am I. My oldest brother is a retired rocket scientist. he was absolutely going to be a scientist. But when we were kids and Star Trek came on, that's what made him be a rocket scientist, I think. And it influenced me in my life. And when we took him to the Deep Space Nine set, about the second or third season, he was over the moon happy. And when he went back to work and said, I was just on the Deep Space Nine set, he was a big hit with all of the other scientists. Yeah.
That's so cool.
That is incredible. And it actually kind of touches on, we talked about Star Trek and what it has done for so many people. Star Trek has created rocket scientists, and Nichelle Nichols has inspired so many women and astronauts. But also, I think one of the things that is interesting to us is that original Star Trek seems so rooted in theater, and we're here to talk about theater. When I grew up on TOS, like I said. Jay had never seen it. I got him into, I was like, you got to watch Star Trek. We got to see how this goes when stuff started getting serious. And one of the reasons that when in the early 2000s, we were watching this show from the 60s, one of the reasons we could connect over it so much was, Jay was watching it and going, the makeup and the lighting and everything about this is so theatrical. And it was that early TV transition from the stage to the screen, and then that legacy of Star Trek came from that. And so we kind of wanted to talk with you guys about what you think the legacy of theater is. What has it brought us? How do we just start a conversation about theater by starting with what has theater done for us?
Well, we can answer that, and Kitty will answer it better than I. But I must say, I'm smiling from year to year because you said back in the early days of TV. The late 60s was not early TV for
not in that way, obviously. But as things were transitioning, storytelling on TV has continued to evolve, but it comes from the tradition of storytelling on the stage, because that stories were told on the stage before they were recorded for the camera, and then TV has evolved from that.
Right. Now, one of the things that theater does do that TV doesn't do. Sometimes TV does it, but for the most part, it doesn't. The theater has always been the forum for language and ideas. Certainly, TV is a forum for ideas. Star Trek is a major forum for ideas, but it isn't necessarily connected to rich, evocative language as the theater is. That's what playwrights do when they write. So that's a difference. But certainly, the ability to deal with language, especially what all of us know to be technobabble. Those sort of skills come from, for actors anyway, come from our ability to deal with classical theater and to make difficult language easy to understand. So that's the bridge. That's why, if you look at most of the series regulars on most of the shows, Star Trek shows, you will find that all of us have theater backgrounds. Whether it's Shatner, whether it's Patrick Stewart, whether it's Avery Brooks, or any of the captains, really, and the crew and the supporting actors, all have large theater backgrounds because we deal with language and we deal with larger than life issues. But what has the theater done for us? I'll let Kitty answer that.
Well, if what theater has done for humanity is it's humanized us. It's taught us empathy. It's taught us to think. It's taught us to form community. One of the great things about being in a theater audience or being on the stage is that it's a permeable membrane. For people who like science, I think that's a good image, that the audience is the last character and that we fit together. One of the things I find so difficult about living in a pandemic is that we aren't able to form community in the same way. I really miss hugging my friends and going to the theater and all of those things. And having the experience of live performance, whether it's in the theater or music or a poetry slam or a dance, anything, it's about forming community. So I think theater does that better than any other medium. If you go to a museum, which I love to do, you go to a museum, but it's you and that piece of art, whether there's a crowd in it or not, it's your sense of that piece of art. But when you go to the theater, the audience becomes a whole, and every night it's a different living experience. One of the things about our theater, which by the way is full of Star Trek actors, Linda Park, Armin, myself, Rhonda Aldrich, who played Patrick's Hollow Suite secretary in the noir episodes. There's a ton of us who appeared on Star Trek. Our founder, Dakin Matthews, did episodes. We like to think of ourselves as a community. There's no other theater I know of that I've ever worked in where the same actors you see on television and film or in the big stages all across the country, or in some cases even the world, come out in the lobby and hang out with you and form community with you. And I think that's, we're an audience of artists, and we're a company of a community of artists and actors and audience members and designers, and we live within the community at large, and that community is brought into our theater. And I don't know any other medium, even, well, in a funny way, Star Trek does the same thing, because we all come together at conventions, and hopefully we'll be able to do in-person conventions again, because I can't tell you how many fans that over the years have become friends of ours. They're not fans per se, they're our friends, and that's extraordinary and wonderful.
And one of the other things that Kitty touched upon that is, again, a relationship to Star Trek is, as she said, one goes to the theater, and when one leaves, if it's a good production and a good play, you will discuss it. You will have questions. You will have it will cause questions in you. And what we've heard ad infinitum from people who've watched Star Trek is it does the same thing, but in a smaller community. Mm-hmm. Families sit around the TV set and watch a show, and social problems are discussed, touched upon, and the family will sit around and discuss those things, and and say, well, this is what I feel about this. And so, in a smaller sense, it's a smaller venue because it's TV, and maybe there are 4 to 6 people watching, or maybe just 2 people watching. In the theater, it can be anywhere from 20 people to 2,000 people watching, and the same response generates the same response.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, my dad actually went out of his way to use episodes of Star Trek to teach his children how to treat other people. So exactly. Of course he started us off, we talk about how I love tribbles. Of course, he showed his 2 little girls the tribble episodes first, but as we got older, he would pull out other episodes and we would watch it, and then we would discuss it. And he had picked that episode to teach us about that social issue. And so I've actually written about how Star Trek was my masterclass in humanity, because it was this way for my dad to show us a story and then talk with us about it. And then, have us learn things from that. And I think that's partially why I was so drawn to become a lighting designer, a theater artist, right. Is that, I was raised in that tradition of tell a story, learn from the story, apply the story to your life, and then share it with others. And that's so much what theater is doing.
And to add, excuse me, Kitty, to add to your story very quickly, let me use an example, Death of a Salesman, very famous play by Arthur Miller, one of America's great playwrights. He wrote a play called Death of a Salesman. It was such a hit and so much discussed that it caused us to get Social Security for older people. It was one of the primary drives in the government passing Social Security. So you see, the theater helped generate an idea, caused a discussion, and something became of it.
You talked so much, I forgot what I was going to say. This is just terrible. I never forget what I was going to say. The other thing about Star Trek is Gene perceived it and pitched it originally as Wagon Train in Space. And Wagon Train was based on the idea of morality plays, that each morality play, each episode would talk about some important moral issue and entertain you at the same time, so that you would enjoy yourself and learn while you were watching an episode of television, whether it was Wagon Train or Star Trek. And that's what I think theater does so beautifully, is that it certainly has to entertain you first. George Bernard Shaw, one of the great writers of the Irish and English stage, knew that he'd give you a spoonful of sugar, making you laugh, and then you would learn something, and he would give every character on all sides of whatever the issue was a real argument, so that people could draw their own conclusions and learn to think. And I think that that's one of the things that Star Trek has done, and one of the things, whether it's Shakespeare or Shaw or the great Greek plays or Tracy Letts or the great modern American playwrights across the board. And Star Trek did something that you described beautifully, which is it was one of the early inclusive shows on television. As much as I now look back at the short skirts those women were wearing and think that's so sexist, when I was a kid and that show first came on the air and I was a little kid, I saw women having really powerful jobs. I saw Nichelle's voice being heard in a way that I didn't ever remember a Black woman having an opportunity to be that way. And it's continued through the entire history of Star Trek, which is magical and theatrical.
Well, I want to talk about the theater that the two of you are creating. You're both invested in this Antaeus Theater Company. I was so struck when I went to do the research that Armin called us out on. But I went to look into it, and the thing that stuck out the most to me is that the two of you have such established, wonderful careers. And I know Armin has done all of these Shakespeare courses, and you almost expect to go and see that this is Armin Shimerman and Kitty Swink's theater and all of this stuff. But you go and you look at the actors and the performers, and everybody, it's page after page. You just scroll and scroll and scroll through all of these amazing performers listed 100% equally in alphabetical order. Everything about the page is ensemble based.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm assuming your research told you that Kitty is one of the two artistic directors of the theater. So whereas I'm just a member, I have acted and I have directed and I have taught, but Kitty actually is the lady, she doesn't write the checks, but she does pick the plays with the help of her co-artistic director, Bill Brocktrop.
In partnership with him, yeah.
But it is an ensemble. It is very, you've touched upon something that is very important to our company. There are no stars. There is nobody who's better or gets more roles or is more prominent than the others. We are an ensemble. Sometimes you're the lead in the play. Sometimes you carry a tray, as we like to say.
Well, I think some of the best theater that I have ever seen has been ensemble theater, because it's about how do we take this story and tell it as a group. And it's not about who's telling the story or who has the most attention on them. But I think that ensemble theater really is just some of the strongest storytelling, because the entire group has to be a part of it to tell that story.
That's right.
Absolutely. You don't get involved with, oh, there's Patrick Stewart, coming out as the father or something like that. And it takes you a while for you to realize it's Patrick Stewart, but he's not playing Picard, he's playing another character. When you have an ensemble of people, you don't get involved in that for any length of time. You're immediately in the midst of the play, and that's what we want you to be. Yes, you may recognize me and some of the others, and Kitty, or you may do that, but we never stress that. We all sit together backstage together. Nobody gets star treatment. Everybody has to do what they have to do. We all have to show up at 7:30. We all have to put our makeup on. We all have to take our makeup off. And as Kitty said, we all have to go out and talk to the audience afterwards, which is a very much a cultural ethos of ours, which is that we are a family. And just because you've watched us for 2.5 hours, now we're going to watch you and talk to you and make you part of our family.
You are part of our family. Dakin Matthews and Lillian Gregg, who founded the theater, founded it as an ensemble of actors, specifically an ensemble. It was actors creating work with actors, actors for actors, and then it's also become actors, directors, designers for each other and for the people who come and commune with us. And it's not the Berliner Ensemble. Certainly we don't have that long of a history, but it has that kind of ethos that we are together. We are creating together. And it's a great group of people to create with, I have to say. I'm so excited every time I step on the stage or sit in the audience and take notes or whatever I'm doing.
So you've touched on something that is really important, and I think takes us into part of what we're here to talk about today, and that is this community sense, this sense that we're all coming together and making together. And obviously a global pandemic is making that quite difficult. So I wonder if you might share with us, I mean, I am a grad student for lighting design right now and trying to study remotely an art form that takes place in a space.
Impossible. It's impossible. I'm sorry.
I'm trying to teach the same thing, and it can be tricky.
It's
I bet.
So, I mean, there are lots of innovations in place. I now have 3 monitors set up for me to virtually render lighting. And yeah, I'm learning a ton about the technology, but not a lot about the art form. And I know that Jay is having a lot of those struggles with his students as well. And a lot of companies are struggling with the Zoom rehearsal format. And how do we maintain that sense of community online? So can you speak to how that is impacting you and how maybe you're dealing with that?
Yes, I mean, we do certainly, our Playwrights Lab meets weekly online on a Zoom format. I am on Zoom every day for many hours in meetings, artistic director meetings and meetings with ensemble members and all those things. Our classes meet online. All of those things are meeting in a Zoom format. But what we're, and we're doing book clubs online, we're doing all that stuff online through Zoom. But what we're putting out as our big chunk of art right now for the fall, instead of our fall production, are audio plays that are called the zip code plays. I know you're probably going to ask me about that later, but I'm just going to incorporate it. Because what we wanted was that sense of intimacy that you get from being in a small theater, which ours is an intimate space, but also you're hearing the actors inside your head, and it's thrilling in the way I assume when my parents were children, before there was television, in the 20s and 30s. Okay, I really dated myself just there. When my parents were children in the 1920s and 30s, they would listen around the radio. The family would listen around the radio. And now, on November 12th, we're dropping these 6 brand new radio plays about zip codes in Los Angeles, where you can take them anywhere and you're with the actors in the room because you've got your earphones in, or you're sitting in front of your monitor on your computer and listening to the radio plays. And we felt we could create the same sort of high-level art that we like to think of on our stage, but in an audio format. And as I have seen a lot of Zoom readings, I've been in a lot of Zoom readings since they started, but because of the lag time and the fact that you're always trying to read somebody's body language and you can't, there's a sense of separation. And what we wanted to do was hold our community together. And if there's a silver lining for theater, or our theater specifically right now in this world, is that you don't have to be in Southern California to enjoy our work. You can be enjoying it from Afghanistan or Ireland or Hong Kong and enjoy it in the same kind of close personal way.
But let me be emphatic about this. It's not theater. It's enjoyable work. It's artists getting together and doing their work. Absolutely. But it's not theater. Theater is about people being in the same space, breathing the same air, watching a live performance with the people right in front of them. We are communicating, and if we squint a little, we can believe that it's reality. But in reality, you're looking at pixels, and so am I.
With the audio plays, you're not looking at pixels. I'm just
right, but it is sound. It is not theater.
Yeah.
It is what theaters have to do now in order to survive. It is a survival thing. But the moment that the plague is over, we will do our best to go back to being on the boards.
And you guys know, because you create theater too, you're artists in theater, you know that that's the missing element, that thing that we're all working together in the room with. I mean, when you create a particularly beautiful lighting effect, you can feel the audience learn something. You can feel them embrace something and fall in love or be angry or
helps tell the story. It helps to tell the story.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Well, and that's why I say that I'm learning a lot about technology and less about the art form. Now, we are taking the opportunity to have real in-depth conversations, much slower conversations and more meaningful conversations about plays that we're not producing than we would have if we were rushing to put up a big season. So don't get me wrong, that work is still getting done. But what's missing is that when I'm digitally rendering light to learn how to use moving lights, it's not the same as diving into a script, because our approach and the approach that we're trained in is from a dramaturgical point of view. What is the story? What is the language? And it's not that I view light as auxiliary to that, but how is that an integral part of that story? And that's what we're trained to do as theater artists, and what Jay is trying to teach his high school students to do is to determine as a group, what is the story here? What is the version of the story we are telling? And how does everything that we do become a part of that? And for people who aren't the people speaking the words, designers are having a really hard time in theater right now saying, hey, we're important too, and we want theater to live in whatever way it needs to still be there, but the challenge is, how does everyone continue to be a part of something when we can't be physically a part of it?
Exactly. And let me say the obvious, whether it's theater or television or radio or whatever medium it is, everybody involved in the creation of the production is an artist. Everyone's work is important. Certainly the actors are the most prominent because that's the ones you see, but they wouldn't be there if they didn't have a script. You couldn't see them if they didn't have lighting. You wouldn't be able to hear them if there weren't audio people doing the job. There wouldn't be anything to hand to one another if we didn't have props.
Or a stage manager.
Or a stage manager to make sure.
So important.
So that's the thing that you learn in the theater, which is, again, replicated in Star Trek, about ensemble. Everybody's work is important, and everybody respects everybody's contribution.
That's true. And my hope is, God willing, and the creek don't rise, we're through the pandemic sooner rather than later, but there was a plague in Shakespeare's London. There was a plague when Broadway, Eugene O'Neill had a play opening on Broadway the year the 1918 flu pandemic hit, and Broadway survived. People have often called theater the beautiful invalid. Well, I'm hoping that the invalid gets up off her bed and embraces people again, because I just think it's so, in a terrible time in the world, what we usually do is come together with the people that we find comfort and joy from and laughter. And right now we're separated from those people because of what's happening in the world. And that makes it so much more difficult. So I'm hoping when this is over that we will rise again into a healthy, thriving world. Also, just purely from an economic point, you guys are struggling, we're all struggling, and the arts is one of the most burgeoning businesses, any kind of arts in the United States. And I think we don't get any real props for that from most people. They don't understand that it isn't just the actors and the designers and the crew and the people who are taking the tickets and the box office and all those people that are out of a job, but it's also the bar that everybody goes to down the street, and the restaurant everybody eats at before the show, and the parking lot, and the place that sells the plywood to help build the platform. And all of those things are desperately affected. The National Endowment for the Arts years ago put out a thing that said that people who have a theater in their community are more likely to vote. People who have a theater in their community, whether they go to that theater or not, the community itself has more civic engagement, has less crime, has more people graduate from high school and college. And I think that would also apply to art galleries and music venues and everything that's part of the arts. We support our communities in a very mutually helpful way.
Art makes you think. And if you don't think, the society succumbs into barbarism.
Yeah, I have to. One of the weirdest things for me as an artistic director is that our arts education program, where we really change kids' lives. They say they're writing a play, and somebody's listening to them in a way that they've never been listened to before, and that allows them to feel self-worth and dignity. And if they're performing, and actors that they have met before or via television or film come up to them and say, that was swell. you can see them do this. You can see them stand up a little straighter, and I miss that so much. Liz Berman, Rick Berman's wife, created one of our, a big chunk of our arts education outreach program. She's a wonderful advocate for young people.
Well, I have seen amazing things at the theater program that Jay teaches at. I am around as his wife working in the area. I stop by all the time. I know most of the kids, and I miss that. But I have seen freshman students come in and they're on their phone all the time, and the only conversation they can have with you is based off of, have you seen this thing pop up? You know, you're like, put the phone down. A, there are power tools around, but B, it's like, have a conversation with me. And by the end of their time there, they are the lead designer on a show, and Jay is telling me, no, they created all of those lighting cues. I didn't do it. They did it. This is their project. And I will walk up to that kid and say, great job. And they will say, thank you very much. And here's what I was thinking in my design. And the phone is nowhere in sight.
It's fantastic.
Again, the arts make you think. They're thinking about making an artistic contribution. Being on the phone, yes, you're sharing with somebody else, but are you making an artistic conversation? Unless perhaps you're making a meme, and even that maybe is questionable. But the arts make you think, and if we don't think, we, as I said, we descend into barbarism.
Well, Kitty, you mentioned the zip code plays, and I do want to touch on them some more, because I see several really amazing things going on with those. And the first is that you have found a way to engage with the community, in that, if I am correct, each play is about a different part, you know, a zip code, if you will, but also the community and the things that are unique to that community within that zip code around you.
So we tasked the Playwrights Lab to pitch us stories, to pitch us play ideas, and we picked 6 of them. We tried to pick 6 diverse geographical ideas for these plays. We tried to pick different genres of plays. There's a play based on a historic incident. There's a play that's magical realism. There's an insanely, ridiculously funny play about what this young writer actually experienced by reaching over a neighbor's fence in Santa Monica and picking a piece of fruit and ending up in Plucker Court. Really happened. And where the community, they didn't really go to court, but well, you'll hear the play. So, and we wanted to have diverse writers, actors, and directors, which we have accomplished. It's in a world that right now is focused on equity and inclusion and diversity in a way that it's never been before. I'm very excited about these plays because they are diverse in all of those ways. And you can take a virtual tour of Los Angeles. If you're in any town in the United States or any town in the world, you can learn a little bit about Los Angeles. It's pretty great, I have to say. You're traveling from the privacy of your own house.
Well, and I think it's also spectacular that you have found a way to continue to support playwrights and elevate voices in that way, in a time where I think a lot of people are still struggling to figure out, you know, how do we do that? How do we keep making work? And I know it's not the same work, but those are playwrights whose work will now be out there.
Not only will it, because it's in a podcast format and you can sign up on Apple or Spotify or go to our website or any of the major podcasting platforms, but we were able to pay them all a little bit of money. The actors all got a little, not only a little bit of money, but also a pension and health contribution, which in a world where so many people are losing their health insurance, I was so happy to be able to do that for these people through the beneficence of a foundation who partially sponsored the plays, and then 6 other sets of people who each individually sponsored a play, one of the 6 plays. So I want to support artists and make good art and bring in the community. So I'm very, very happy with how these are turning out. And the woman who composed the music and our sound designer, who's also a member of our ensemble, but it now designs at the Kennedy Center and at the, you know, designs all over United States. The first place he designed in in the United States was the NTS Theater Company. So it's just the Foley, which is the live sound effects that he made, the movement, it's all fantastic. I'm so proud of the actors and the writers, and mostly what I did was he created a little, he bought egg crate booths for everybody and microphones, and figured out how to do it on Clean Feed. And then he sent Bill Brocktrop, my co-artistic director, and I, who are two of the biggest Luddites in America, the instructional videos, and had us go through the process of setting up a safe COVID booth in our own house. And we both succeeded at doing it. Now, I had a little help, but it was pretty great. So everybody was working from the safety of their own home. Our executive assistant would drop the entire kit off. There were videos that got sent to people, and they learned how to do them. And then she would pick them up, sanitize them, let them sit for a couple of days, and then drop them to the next group of people.
But it is a tragedy that theater artists, other kinds of artists that work in community, work in ensemble with it, who don't work by themselves, their work is being curtailed because of the plague. So that Jay and people like him, can't do what they normally do because it's just not safe. And we're all hoping for the day when that passes. And I hope that when it does pass, that we can all go back to work. But I have, being somewhat of a pessimist, I have a fear that the theaters, because it draws strangers together into a small space, will perhaps be one of the last places to come online when the all clear sign is given.
Broadway has changed their reopening date many times, as have most theaters in the United States. And I think, given how bad the virus is right now, more than 122,000 new cases yesterday. I don't know how many today, 120,000 the day before. And people afraid to take vaccines. When the vaccine does come, that it will be longer than we had hoped. And I'm so sorry about that. And even when we first opened, probably we'll be socially distanced. And part of the fun of being in a theater is being cheek to jowl with somebody you've never met before and experiencing it with them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think we've touched so much on how theater is for the community and of the community. And I think right now the future of theater rests with the community too, that if we want to have theaters to go back to, we need to be finding ways to support theaters and the theater makers now. It's a big conversation that we sort of have sometimes and sort of not in, I mentioned I'm back in grad school for lighting design because it's, they're preparing students to go out and do this thing. And students are kind of like, is there a thing to go out and do? And there are people, I have been working freelance in the area for a while since undergrad. So, me too, a little bit. People are kind of like, do I just need to find something different to do at this point? And there will be people who were making theater who are no longer making theater when this is over because they had to find something else to do.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. A lot of people like that.
We are going to lose a lot of artists because of that. And that is a great shame, great tragedy for the arts in our country, and I'm assuming in every country around the world.
Right. I remember Andrew Keats, who directed the play that Marina Sirtis did not last summer, but summer before last in London, tweeted the other day that the people that you saw on the West End last year are now working in the service industry so that they can feed their families. And I have certainly worked in the service industry. I was a bartender, but
I was a bartender too once.
Just for a little while.
7 years, I believe. And that's there's no shame. There's only dignity in having a survival job. But for instance, one of the young people who had been a member of Antias and who came to Antias largely through Armins, having met him working in San Diego, was doing Harry Potter on Broadway for the last couple of years. And he said, I don't I don't know how to do anything else. I'm an actor. He was playing Hagrid, and now he's trying to figure out how he's going to stay in Brooklyn. You know what I mean? It's just a terrible time in the world right now for artists. If you're a fine art, if you're a painter or a sculptor, you can work by yourself, but you can't do that if you're a collaborative artist. And that's what the four of us and so many other people are.
And I do want to put it out there for folks that there is a link to the Zip Code plays and a spot where you can donate to help support them, in both on the schedule page where you maybe found the link to this panel on the Vendors Hall website, but also just in this video, there's a link right there. And there is also a link for something else very special that I want to talk about that is also related to theater, and that is, Armin, your book. And I believe, if I remember correctly, I heard you mention that it came out of this kind of challenge to write a story based on a play. Is that true?
Yes and no. It wasn't. Yes, I would say you're 90% right. Absolutely. A wonderful fantasy writer named Michael Scott, who is an Irishman who has written nearly 100, if not more, fantasy novels. He and I had collaborated on my first novel called Merchant Prince, and he recommended this idea of putting Dr. John Dee, who was the lead character in my current novel and my past novels as well, and with Shakespeare, because they lived at the same time. And he thought it would be a great idea if we had a series of novels where the two of them acted like Sherlock Holmes and John Watson and solved mysteries. So yes, that was an idea given to me by Michael Scott something like 25, maybe 30 years ago. And it's taken me this long to write the novel.
If you have ever read any of the Artemis Fowl books, Michael is the writer of those.
A wonderful writer and a very nice man. And
maybe he just kissed the Blarney Stone a little bit.
Yeah, he's an Irishman. He's an Irishman. Anyway, so yes, you're absolutely right.
Well, and I've just heard you talk so eloquently about how theater is language and literature is language. So is there, because you come from this background of theater, does that form of storytelling influence how you approach writing for books?
Yes, that's a wonderful question, and you're absolutely right. Because Shakespeare is one of my characters, one of my two lead characters, and because it always bothers me when I read a Elizabethan period novel, and the writing is very modern, and sometimes there are words that go, no, that word wasn't invented for another 200 years. So I was very select about my language. It is intimidating and daunting to try to write like Shakespeare, but because I've had 40 years of constant connection with Elizabethan writing, not just Shakespeare, but lots of people who lived at that time, both artists and historians and politicians and anything that came out of that period, one time or another. You can see the books behind me. I've sort of looked at and tried to digest. So the book has a lot of period-like language to it, but I was very conscious that having taught Shakespeare all my life, I'm very aware that most people think that Shakespeare is very hard to understand. I find that to be questionable, but then I've had more experience with than most. So I was very careful to give you what I would consider historical language, but never so arcane as to make it understandable to a modern audience. And the people who have read my book so far have said that's one of the pleasures of the book, that they really do think they're listening to people from the period, but they never really have a problem understanding what they're saying.
Here's my job on the book. I would read a chapter and go, that's confusing. That's confusing.
And she was very good about that. And thanks to her input, what I just told you is true. So I'm trying to deal with language. Language is what I'm most interested, both as an actor and as a writer. And I'm trying to get that into my book and sort of, you touched upon it earlier, or perhaps Kitty said it, which is that art should both educate and entertain. And that's what I wanted my novel to be. Yes, it's historical, but at times it's very charming, it's very funny, it's very inviting. And sometimes it's also very political, because the period I write about, most people don't know this, but was an enormously political and dangerous time for the two religious sides, both Protestants and Catholics. And although we think of it as merry old England, if you were Catholic and living in England, it wasn't so merry. If you were Protestant and living outside of England, it wasn't so merry.
Well, and I think that these are themes. Theater does this, literature does this. You know, it takes a setting, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the story that's being told in that setting isn't very much of today. And I think that's one of the reasons we're all here. We've talked about Star Trek, how we love Star Trek. And one of the things science fiction in particular does, and it sounds like your book does, which I'm very excited, my copy is on its way, but is to take something that might otherwise be difficult to digest or talk about, put it in a setting that is enough removed that we don't consider it a condemnation of ourselves, and then ask us to think about it.
That's excellent. Excuse me, Kitty. That's excellent. That's exactly what Star Trek has always tried to do, is to do exactly what you just said and make it palatable and make you think and not turn you off immediately. I
think what makes something a classic is that it transcends the ages, because it tells a story that people from the entire swath of history can understand. If you think about Shakespeare and you think about, say, King Lear, and you have the brothers, Edgar and Edmund, and one of them is a bastard and one of them is being hunted because he's been wrongly accused of something. And I think that that's a story that's universal. What happens to you in society until very recently, if you're a bastard, how you're treated differently than everybody else, is something that people can understand. If you're playing one of the pants roles, which is a woman dressed like a man in Shakespeare, we understand that women aren't, at that time, and still in many places of the world, still in many places in America, are not safe by themselves as women. But you put on men's clothes and you all of a sudden become much more safe. I think Oedipus and the search for his family, who his real roots are, because he thinks that somebody's his father who's not his father, and then the scales fall off his eyes. That's a classical thing. We all are looking for where our roots are, who our real family is. And sometimes our real family is the community we make for ourselves. So those all make things classic because they transcend the ages. And that's what I think Star Trek continues to appeal over generations, because of the same thing. And I think Armin's book hopefully will do the same.
And if I may add one thing, one small thing to it, in my studies of Shakespeare and Renaissance England, when you read Shakespeare, oftentimes a lot of myths are thrown at you, and a lot of allusions to Greek literature or Roman or Latin literature is there. Why is it there? It's there because those people studied those things and learned lessons about history, politics, religion, science from that. And therefore, if you put it in a context that they would understand, which would be these myths, and they go, oh, of course, when so-and-so did that in mythology, they learned this and this lesson. So therefore, if I'm in the same place as that mythical character, I should learn from that mythical character's journey and realize this is probably going to be the outcome. Very quickly, one of the things we're hearing today and in the news in the last couple of days is, I've heard this mentioned several times, which is, who is going to tell King Lear that he's not king anymore? And that's an allusion to a Shakespearean play. We know it's an allusion to a modern situation, but we understand the concept because we've been taught that allusion. We've been taught King Lear, and we know what they're talking about.
Right. People learn from metaphor, and that's what art creates. Is it creates metaphor for us to learn from, so that you can connect the dots.
Or you can refer back. Mm-hmm. When Jay likes a thing a certain way, he thinks, oh, this is the way this looks at this period of time, or something I saw in a production that it's inspired me. So I'm making it up. It's your creation, but you're also referring back to something that came to you as an epiphany at one time or another.
It's evocative. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, and I think our job as artists too is to understand what is in the collective. How do people respond to certain things? And when we're trying to tell a story and make someone feel a certain way, we have to be in tune with what people will respond to. And you can never force someone to feel one, it's a conversation that we have, is you can't set out to be like, they're going to leave the theater and they're going to think this thing and they're going to do it because this you told them to. But you do make choices that are evocative of this emotion or that emotion, or, look over here, and those kinds of things. And that's kind of what art does for society, is to help take these things that are out there in the world and put them forth for people in a way that draws upon metaphor and makes it something that we can understand and talk about.
And makes them talk, exactly. You can agree with it or you cannot agree with it. That's up to you. That's the way you take it. That's your response. But at least the art, no matter what art it is making you talk about it, think about it, have an opinion about it.
Well, you've also said something, this is a little bit off topic, but that people have a hard time with Shakespeare. And I find that a lot of time when people have a hard time with the language of Shakespeare, and I am not claiming to be an expert on Shakespeare, but I find a lot of the time it's people reading Shakespeare that are having a hard time with, and it's meant to be off the page. You're supposed to hear it. You're supposed to hear it from people who understand it, which can also be, if the actor knows what they're saying when they say that, whatever that phrase is, it is just as legible as the conversation that you and I are having.
Exactly. Exactly. And I've taught that ad infinitum, so you can come and teach my class when I'm not available.
No one wants that.
There are people who are on Twitter. You can follow William Shakespeare, and there's like 4 or 5 quotes a day that come up, and they're almost always directed at something that's happening in the United States right now, and they've been fantastic because they're in small bites of 2 or 3 lines. You go, oh, I get that. That's so much of what we say commonly in our lives are so many allusions and metaphors and phrases or things that Shakespeare created, and we don't even know, most people don't even know where they came from, or not necessarily Shakespeare, any other plays. Wednesday, when we were still slowly watching the results come in from the election, I said, this reminds me of one of my favorite lines in Oscar Wilde is, "This suspense is terrible. I hope it will last." And I thought, well, I don't want the suspense anymore. I just want it to be done with. And so I tweeted that, and a friend of mine said, "Wait, Willy Wonka stole that?" And it's like, yes, Willy Wonka stole that. That's right. He stole it from Oscar Wilde.
Well, I think that this is true of all plays, right? I mean, part of my process, I don't ever feel like I understand the work, no matter how much time I've spent reading it or what, until I have heard, even if it's just that first read through, when it's all of the performers are coming together and they're interpreting for the first time. It hasn't gone through table work or anything like that, but just hearing the language spoken, I 100% of the time learn amazing things that are very important things that I need to know about the work. And
don't you
get that if you just read it.
Right. Don't you feel as a designer that the cool part of the process is seeing the first read through and then coming in periodically and doing your focus and blah, 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 and getting through to opening night, and how it keeps changing. And as actors, we're still learning things through a whole run. So it's pretty great because you just keep getting to go, oh, and have little epiphanies. And as an audience member, that's why I often see really good plays multiple times, because I learn something every time.
And one of the things you said that I just want to reiterate and make sure everybody hears. You said if the actors understand the language. And most of the time, if you see a bad production of Shakespeare, it's because the actors don't understand the language. So how can you understand it if the actors don't understand it? Just because they're actors, just because they're getting paid, just because they've been in rehearsal for 30 days, doesn't necessarily mean that they understand what they're doing. just as some auto mechanics are better than other auto mechanics.
And I'll say even good actors fail big time, you know.
Yes, it depends on the director. It depends on the designers. It depends on the costumer.
It depends on the actor.
It depends on the actor they're working with, or the actor themselves. They can be a wonderful actor, but they're wrong for the part.
And I just, we're running out of time, and I'm desperately disappointed because I could have this conversation with the two of you for hours, but also we've promised not to take up your whole day either. But I think that the real takeaway from here is that theater is an art form that it does something for society that cannot be replicated. It causes us to stop and to think and to come together as a community. And it's in trouble right now. And we have to, as a community, figure out a way to preserve this art form that has been around for as long as we have.
Right.
And
not just Antiochus. Everything. If you go to any theater in your community, see, if you can't donate, see if you can engage with them in whatever they're doing online. Just reach out because we're all hungry, the artists and the audience members, to have that two-way flow.
And if I may say to artists like yourselves, if you can't do it, continue to study, continue to look around you and review other things, review your own work, other people's work, anything you can, so that your mind is working, your mind is thinking about things. And lo and behold, when you're in the middle of a project, when that comes, then some epiphany will come from experience that you've had during this time. And you go, oh, I remember I saw that. But that won't happen unless you're constantly investigating, if you're constantly looking for new ways to improve your art.
And not just your mind, but your heart and soul. I think it's everything. It's the whole package. It's the whole package of humanity.
Well, I think that's just good advice for everyone, right? To just be open to learn from others. We especially need that right now, to draw upon other people's experiences and let them inform our own. And I think that is just a really great piece of advice to end this wonderful, amazing panel on. And again, please check the description here. Go to the schedule page on Vendors Hall, HAUL.com. You can learn more about Armin's book. You can learn more about the zip code plays. You can also find the link to the next panel, which Larry Nemechek is going to be leading. But my heart is so full. I've been so excited for this panel and this discussion all day because I knew that it would be a meaningful and exciting discussion. So thank you both.
Thank you.
And it was meaningful for us too because you guys are so generous.
And smart.
And smart.
And
Thank
smart.
you.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.